first of all, talks like these just don't happen. Um, this was a talk that was at least 3 weeks in the making. Remember, Donald Trump was going to solve this conflict in 24 hours, and it became apparent that he wasn't going to solve this conflict in 24 hours. The Russians have been sending signals that, they are prepared to bring this war to an end, but the war only ends with a Russian victory, meaning Russia gets what Russia wants. Otherwise, there's no reason to talk about bringing the war to an end. And, Donald Trump had surrounded himself with advisors, and one in particular, Keith Kellogg, who was promulgating, 80-day, 100-day, peace plans that were just unrealistic, non-start. And the Russians sent signal after signal after signal. No, that don't even call. You can't call me if that's what we just don't want. We don't want to ruin it. We get one first date, Donnie, and it's got to work, because otherwise, that'll create its own inertia or momentum that will prevent, a U.S.-Russian brokered peace. You get one shot. That's it. And I think Trump got the message. He laid back. He continued. It's a complicated game for Donald Trump here. Look at the condemnation that he's getting right now for this phone call in the West. Surrender. It's a new Munich. And of course it's not. It's the most realistic approach possible. But in order to set it up, Trump had to, prepare the basis first. And the first thing he had to do is give Keith Kellogg's plan a chance to die a natural death, which it did. Notice in the makeup of the delegation that Trump has appointed to head up these talks with Russia. The Secretary of State is the lead. You have the National Security Advisor. You have the Director of the CIA that will be on there. What you don't have is, and you also have the Special Envoy for Middle East piece, because there's a man who has some competence, a man who's able to, cut through the BS and get down to brass tacks. What you don't have is Keith Kellogg. Keith Kellogg was sent to the Munich Security Conference to deliver his 100-day plan. Then that was canceled. Then he was sent off to Europe to sort of talk with them, and then he just disappeared. And so did his plan. And that's the big takeaway, is that there is no 100-day plan. What there is a Russian plan. The Russians have said straight up, we have conditions that have to be met. And the new Secretary of Defense of the United States meeting in the Ramstein contact group let it be clear that the United States got the message. Ukraine will never, ever, ever, ever be a member of NATO. I mean, Taylor Swift could write a song about that. Because that's just the way it's going to be. They will never, ever, ever be a member of NATO. That's clear. The other thing that's clear is that Ukraine will not regain its 2014 borders. Crimea is Russia permanently. So is Kherson. So is Zaporizhia. So is Lugansk. So is Donetsk. That's it. It's been written, and this is important from the Russian perspective, because when the Americans say this, that implies that, because Russia has also said that, we're not doing a handshake agreement here. This will be a comprehensive peace agreement. And, if you want to sit here and talk about security guarantees for Ukraine and all that, it cuts both ways. What we need is a treaty that recognizes these territories to be Russia. Ukraine must recognize, this isn't one of those, where Ukraine goes, well, we'll temporarily concede that Russia has occupied these lands, but we will get them back. This isn't something where Europe and the United States, produce maps like we did during the Cold War that show the Baltic states to be occupied territory. No, this is one where our maps will show that these territories belong to Russia because they are part of Russia. This is a very important point. And the other thing is, Trump has said, Europe, this is your problem. You have to solve this in terms of security guarantee. We're not going to be part of it. No American troops. Now, you remember Zelensky said there can't be, international peacekeepers unless American troops are there. Well, I guess there can't be international peacekeepers, right, Zelensky? Because not one American troop will participate in this. Two, if Europe is to be able to provide any peacekeeping force, they will not operate under the protection of Article 5 of the NATO Charter, which means they're on their own, which means there won't be a European peacekeeping force. And the Russians won't accept it anyways. But what the United States is doing is creating the conditions to undermine the viability of their route to begin with, cutting it off at the knees. And the other thing is we're done sending large-scale weapon shipments to Ukraine. It's over. Europe has to step up and do that. And we're putting the whole burden on Europe if Europe wants to sustain this conflict, Europe has to pay for this conflict. The United States is looking for peace. But here's the other fascinating thing. No ceasefire. None whatsoever. Which means that as this conflict goes on, and as the United States and Russia enter these negotiations, if Russia is going to, back up its demands on the battlefield, and the United States isn't going to go, well, I guess we're sending another $100 billion there. The United States is going, hey, Europe, that's your problem, not ours. We don't care anymore. And that's the big signal that was sent. The United States is unplugging from Europe. Again, the Secretary of Defense made this very clear, that Europe is no longer a priority of the United States. We are unplugging. Our priorities are the American homeland and the Pacific. That it's that simple. And in the future, Europe's going to have to deal with all these issues on its own. The United States, I think, is going to work with Russia to create not only the conditions for the termination of conflict in Ukraine, but also for the creation of a new European security framework, which is what Russia has strategically been seeking, from day one. And then it's up to Europe to kick in. But look at how the Americans are doing this. We're done treating Europe as a singularity. Trump has said that. We're not dealing with the EU. We're dealing with individual European nations. And so we will transaction this thing to death. And so, if Ursula von der Leyen and, this lady from, I guess she's from Latvia.
Estonia. She's from Estonia. I know you're talking about. She's a lunatic.
Kallis or something of that nature. Yep. They become totally irrelevant people. I mean, they can sit there and posture and talk. I mean, Ursula published something called the Weimar Declaration. No one cares. Kallis is talking about, we stand with Ukraine. No one cares. They don't matter. What matters is the conversations the United States has with the British, with the French, with the Germans, with the Italians, with the Poles, with the Romanians. We're having one-on-one connectivity with Europe again. We're done dealing with this fake thing. And the other thing we're done with is NATO. We're telling NATO we're pulling 20,000 troops out. Where are they going to come from? But they're not coming from our bases in Germany. They're probably coming from the forward bases in Poland, which is another signal. We're done doing the leaning forward, aggressive Russia thing. We're pulling out of Poland, which means Poland, you got to start talking realistically about what the future is. And that's the thing. By pulling America back, it forces Europe to confront the reality of Europe. For too long, the Europeans have been these tiny little collection of chihuahuas barking at the big Russian pit bull because you got the American pit bull there, next to him going, yep. And now the American pit bull is going, yeah, we're going to go chase another bone. And now the chihuahuas are going, wait a minute, you can't do that. There's a pit bull there. Europe's going to have to learn to stop barking and start, looking for solutions. They've hidden behind the American shield for too long, and it's cost America greatly. And I just want to remind people, let's put this all in perspective. We almost went to nuclear war with Russia this past fall. We literally were this close. People have forgotten about that. When the histories are written about this, they'll realize just how bad the situation was. That's because of Europe. I blame Europe. I don't blame Russia. I don't even blame the United States. I blame Europe for creating the conditions that had. As an American, I'm tired of letting Europeans push us down the path of conflict that we don't need to fight and we gain nothing from. And Europe gains nothing from it as well. Look at the European economy. It is trashed. I mean, the Baltic states, economic geniuses as they are, declared victory by unplugging their electrical grid from they call it the Soviet system, the Russians. And overnight, 120% increase in the price of electricity. It's only going to go up. The Europeans right now are paying 4 times market value for gas. 4 times. And then you have Kala sitting there bad-mouthing America. Let me remind the Europeans, we supply you with liquid natural gas. Yes, we're raking in profits, baby, but you really want to play games with us? Because all we have to do is divert all our LNG to the Pacific market, and now you have no gas. And then you're going to have to go to the spot market and buy the gas from the Russians, who are going to charge you 10 times the price. You guys are truly the dumbest people that walk the face of the earth. And I think America's just tired of playing with dumb people.
There we are. Yeah. Look, I agree with you. I guess I agree with you up to a point. I mean, the U.S. certainly had no issue with the expansion of NATO. At the very least, under, let's say, the liberal order, had no issue with the expansion of NATO. And, an argument can be made, at the least I've heard it, this term, leading down the garden path, or the primrose path, or whatever they call it. I mean, we knew a long time ago that NATO was always a red line. Trump articulated in his commentary, NATO was always a red line. And so is this something do you think this is a new orthodoxy that has taken hold in regards to the Republican Party, or at the very least the Trumpish wing of the Republican Party, this kind of skepticism? And do you think this is going to be something that we move forward with as a norm? I hope that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. First of all, I'm not absolving America of any of its past sins. NATO expansion was an American project, but it was also a project brought on by Europe. Europe didn't know how to exist in a post-Cold War environment. The absorption of Eastern Europe into Western Europe was a frightening prospect. And then, of course, we have to remember that we still needed to solve that problem of the Balkans, of Yugoslavia. They needed America to do this. So, America, the biggest sinner here, is Bill Clinton. Yes, he inherited a posture by George Herbert Walker Bush that said we're not going to abide by the commitments made to Gorbachev about the not 1 inch eastward. But it was Clinton that actually acted on it. Clinton had a chance to save everybody from this nonsense by being a true friend of Russia, by caring about the future of Russia. But again, there's a new long telegram out written by the charge d'affaires to the American embassy in Moscow, Mr. Mary, dated 1994, that basically lays out how disruptive and destructive America's policy towards Russia was, how we destroyed any possibility of Russia building a foundation for democratic opposition, to bring democracy and true democratic reforms to Russia, the kind that are grown from within Russia. Instead, we backed this brutal dictator named Boris Yeltsin. Any guy that puts tanks in the streets to fire on the parliament has to be called brutal dictator. Boris Yeltsin was a horrible, horrible president, didn't care about Russia, and he was a tool of the United States, and we saw what happened. We destroyed Russia during that time. And as we destroyed Russia, we expanded NATO, filled that vacuum, took advantage of Russian weakness to move forward aggressively. Why? Because we wanted to ensure that Russia could never rise up again to challenge us in a way that the Soviet Union did. So we created the entire foundation for what happened when Russia finally said no. And yet, a guy named Vladimir Putin came in and said, "No, Russia's not going to accept the terms that you've put forward here. Russia will define its own terms." What Boris Yeltsin should have done, and stood up. And now we're trapped. Now we're in a trap because Russia's becoming that which we didn't want it to become. We expanded NATO to prevent that from happening, but found out that NATO can't prevent it because NATO is an empty suit. As we expanded NATO in terms of the size, we stopped being NATO. And what I mean by that is we stopped being the honest to God military alliance based upon self-protection, self-defense. And instead, NATO became this political, geopolitical, power base for the United States, where regime change became NATO's mission. Stopped being a defensive alliance, became an offensive alliance, It bombed Belgrade in 1999. It carried out regime change in Libya, not part of traditional NATO missions. It got involved in Afghanistan, again, well outside of NATO, because it wasn't there to be NATO, wasn't there to look out for North Atlantic, things. It was there to do the bidding of the United States. And, oftentimes when you have relationships, they become traps. And what happened is, we built a trap for ourselves in Ukraine, jumping in with 2 feet in a problem that we couldn't solve because NATO wasn't up to the task. Ukraine was NATO's comeback after the debacle of Afghanistan, after the fact that it was, Donald Trump had called it out. You can't fund yourselves. You want America to do everything for you, and you have done nothing, literally nothing, to promote true collective self-defense. And Ukraine became the trap, because the United States, eventually we have leadership in now that realized that this is heading us down to a path to hell. It's a highway to hell. It will end in nuclear war. We're not going to do this anymore. There's no reason for the United States to be confronting Russia like this. This was a clash of, fundamental principles. The old Cold War Russophobic, Russia is the enemy, we will use Russia to justify military expansion, etc., with more realistic modern thinking, which is why do we have to be enemies with Russia? What is the fundamental? Russia's not a threat to us. We don't have to do this. But we had NATO, which had been expanded solely on the premise of confronting Russia. And what Donald Trump has done is said to NATO, you wanted it, you got it. But NATO can't do it. They could never meet the 2% that Donald Trump insisted they meet back when he was in his first term.
He wants 5
now. He wants 5, and they definitely can't do that. And when America pulls out, it's 10 to 15, and they definitely can't do that. So I think, Trump it took 3 weeks for Trump to position himself to confront Europe with its inadequacies. And what's going to happen is, as the United States initiates this negotiation with Russia, more and more responsibilities can be thrust upon Europe, and they can't handle it, and Europe will collapse under the burden. And all European opposition to a peace in Ukraine will go away as Europe realizes they're not up to the task. And it's part of Donald Trump's strategy. I think, again, Trump isn't as stupid as his critics think he is. He's not the world's greatest, expert on Russia and all this, but he understands negotiations, and he understands positions, and he understands how to leverage strengths and weaknesses to get what you want. And, I think Keith Kellogg was a fascinating bait and switch. This is my assessment. That Donald Trump put Keith Kellogg out there and his 100-day plan to suck Europe in to concepts that Europe can't sustain on their own. So Keith Kellogg came out there and he talked about, a peacekeeping force and European involvement and this and that. And the Europeans are signing up for that. Yep. We're there. And then at the last second, Trump went, oh, okay, good. Keith's done. We're out. It's all yours. And Europe's going, wait a minute. Where are you? We signed up to do it because you were here and we're not. And Europe's going to go, well, we can't do that. Problem solved. See, if we'd come in straight up saying, we're not going to do it, it's on you, that could have created a whole bunch of political baggage and all this. This way, Europe is committed to something they can't do. And Europe will be the one to unplug, withdraw. And so will Ukraine. You're going to see that it's going to be Ukraine because, again, the genius of engaging in negotiations without Ukraine at the table, without a ceasefire, is that the longer Ukraine continues to play, reticent on this, the more damage that's done to Ukraine. And eventually the Ukrainians, because there is no Europe to save them, will turn to the United States and say, just make the pain go away. Just make the pain go away.
Scott, I want to play this clip from Trump's briefing yesterday. I mean, I do want to get to what that new security architecture of Europe looks like, because you're right. Ukraine was always this kind of symbol for NATO expansion. And Russia seems to want it, even in the beginning of this, a larger security framework of Europe, almost as if there's this kind of acknowledgement that there are different powers in the world now, as opposed to what they were before. And Russia has demonstrated that power in Ukraine itself that has to be acknowledged in any kind of framework that's set up going forward. So 1,000% agree with you. I want to play Trump's clip. I was fascinated by this interview, to be honest with you. This is him at the briefing yesterday. Listen to what he says here.
NATO membership for Ukraine.
I don't think it's practical to have it personally. I know that a new Secretary of Defense, who's excellent, Pete, made a statement today saying that he thinks it's unlikely or impractical. I think probably that's true. I think long before President Putin, they said there's no way they'd allow that. This has been going on for many, many years. They've been saying that for a long time, that Ukraine cannot go into NATO. And I'm okay with that. I just want the war, whether they are or they're not. But it certainly would seem to be that most people have said that that is something that's not going to happen.
Are you freezing out President Zelensky of this process a bit? Isn't there a danger of that?
No, I don't think so, as long as he's there. But, you know.
Tell me this. What is the significance of the U.S. president acknowledging that?
It changes everything. It's off the table now. I mean, the concept, this was always a fundamental. NATO membership is what caused this war. Ukraine seeking NATO membership, NATO seeking to oppose itself on Ukraine. This was what it was all about, and this was sort of the. Europe and Ukraine were holding out for this. Even if you couldn't get it today, they said, well, in 10 years, in 20 years, and the Russians are saying never, ever, ever. And Trump, who, frankly speaking, amongst the European and NATO and Ukrainian partnership, is the only voice that counts. Trump said, no, it's not going to happen, which means that it's not going to happen. As I posted today, some British, bigwig was, we will stand by this and Ukraine will be NATO. I said, Daddy said no. I'm sorry. Daddy said no. That's, the equivalent of the kid. I want candy. I want candy. Daddy said no. You ain't getting candy. Europe's not getting, NATO's not getting Ukraine. And it's not just that NATO's not getting Ukraine. You talked about, this larger European security framework.
Yes.
NATO's not getting NATO. I think NATO's over. I think NATO's finished. I think this is the nail in the coffin of NATO, which makes a European security framework even more viable and possible. Because you see, one of the things that the Russians were insisting on is that NATO withdraw its military presence back to the 1997 lines. And this would have been, difficult to negotiate amongst Europeans, and it still would be a difficult obstacle. But if NATO goes away, problem solved. And now we can get into discussions about a new conventional forces treaty in Europe. Talk about correlation and relationships of conventional forces to bring about genuine stability. And it's going to also require the Baltic states to stop being suicidal. Russia's not saying, look, we want the Baltics back. What Russia's saying is you got to treat the Russian populations there with respect. That's all. Let them speak Russian. Let them practice their religion. Stop persecuting them. And stop pretending that you guys can go to war against us. I don't know how many times I have to listen to a Lithuanian minister of defense talking about how they are ready to go to war and beat Russia. No, you're not. Never will be. Not even with NATO, because NATO's never will be. Poland has to become more realistic about its approach towards Russia. Europe has to stop talking about defeating Russia and worry about how to peacefully coexist with Russia. Because frankly speaking, the path forward for Europe to get its economy stable is through Russian energy.
Right.
And there's no other path available to it. American energy just is a non-starter. It's bankrupting Europe as we speak. So in order to get access to Russian Europe, you've got to normalize relations with Russia, which means you have to stop saying stupid things like we're going to beat Russia.
Yeah. We're with you for as long as it takes. We'll take this war over if America. Yeah.
As long as it takes. Well,
Yeah.
it's done, man.
Yeah, that's
It
over
that
with.
long, did it?